Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Art Talks Theatre, proudly brought to you by ComSec. I can't even speak today because I'm so excited about this next session. Just a quick reminder before we start that all of our talks today are streamed live online, which is not going to help you very much because you're here, although you could watch them live online whilst you're here in the room. All the talks for the rest of the weekend are streamed live, and they're also available after the event. You can go to sydneycontemporary.com.au, log on to the website and watch it again, as I'm sure you will all want to be doing. So I'm going to hand over to our moderator today, Anne, who's going to introduce everybody. Away you go.
So welcome everyone. It's sort of a bit hard, everyone's sitting to the left of us, but we're here to talk about the marvellous form of fine art printmaking. And we're really lucky today to have three fabulous artist printmakers who will talk a little bit further about what the artist-printer collaboration is all about. But just briefly, my name's Anne Virgo and I'm Director of Australian Print Workshop in Melbourne. And we're a not-for-profit artist organisation and we've been going for 35 years. And amongst the different range of programs that we offer, we do work with artists to make limited edition prints. That's our premises. And so over the years, we've worked with many, many hundreds of artists, and we've made many, many thousands of prints in most print mediums: lithographs, etchings, woodcuts, lino cuts, etc., with artists from all around Australia and overseas. But what I always say is that not much has really changed since Rembrandt was making his etchings some 400 years ago. Techniques and approaches have changed, but essentially it's still the same. All the great artists at some stage in their career make limited edition prints. So if you go back into history, whether it's a Dürer or a Picasso or an Andy Warhol or a Sean Gladwell, all the great artists make fine art limited edition prints. So it's a beautiful medium. So I'm not going to speak any more about my organisation, but I think to start off the discussion is just to really clarify when we talk about a fine art limited edition print, what that actually means. Given that we're a fairly small audience, and I can sort of see you through the light, is everybody here sort of familiar with fine art printmaking? Just by show of hands, are you mainly practitioners or a bit of a mix? Okay, just to give us a bit of a clue, because some of the terminology is quite confusing. The word print is bandied around a lot, and when we talk about print, we refer to it as being an original work of art. It's not a reproduction of an existing work. So we're going to start off this afternoon with Theo Tremblay. And Theo, I've known for many years, is one of Australia's leading master printers, particularly renowned for his work and expertise in lithography and for the work that he does more recently with Indigenous communities in the northern part of Australia. But without saying anything further, Theo, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your practice and your experience.
Okay, well...
I'll just flick onto your...
Thank you.
There we go.
My involvement in printmaking has spanned over 40 years. I'm not quite sure why. It wasn't planned that way, but life happens, eh? What is a master printer? Well, I don't call myself a master printer. People do that for me. But if you have to ask, how does one acquire that term? And I do defend it because there's been a long line of printers who have worked for generations, producing beautiful works and getting a lot less credit than the artists themselves, unless, of course, you make your own prints. The long tradition of collaborative printmaking is quite extensive, and as Anne said, going back to Schoenberg and Dürer and Rembrandt, people like Rembrandt were master artists, and they also had different printmakers work with them, learning the craft, and then taking on the responsibility, and it is a very strong responsibility to produce the best works of art. Here you can see Ken Tyler and myself a long time ago working together on a project at the Canberra School of Art. He was a great mentor and of great interest to me because he gave me some very key ideas of why one needs to profess in an area that so many people know little of. And he was a great inspiration. He was part of the Tamaran campaign to resurrect printmaking, lithography from obscurity and raised it above the highest level. Bundak Marika was also a great mentor to me and taught me many things about culture that I didn't know and that I was very keen to understand. So those two influences on my life have formed the way I've gone for the last 25 years, and that's working in collaboration with Indigenous artists. This is one of the first little line-out cuts we made, and you know, that's another aspect of being a printmaker. You're asked to do things that might be out of your comfort zone. That's always a challenge. You know, some printmakers say, well, I only work in this area. I'm sorry, I don't go out of the boundary. So I call myself a boundary rider in that regard because I'm always taking on a challenge. And that lady has instigated some amazing changes in my approach to printmaking. The press that I've got is huge, and she suggested back in 1985 that I work bigger and that wouldn't it be nice if we could make some really big lino cuts? And this is only a little tiny piece which features in Jennifer Isaac's Aboriginality, very, very poor reproduction of the original. This is the 1986 cover of Imprint magazine. It's the first color rendition of the publication, and it honored a print that I did in collaboration with Johnny Bullen. That's me pulling a print. That's another thing, but we do also weird things. I sent a stone out to the Kimberley. It came back smashed. I put it all together, took one print using a Rosalind Keane Barron, my second best press, and transferred the image onto a new stone, which is indicated there, and was able to fulfill the entire edition of 35 prints. This is another image, very bad image of me working with Emily Kinwari. We did a whole series of prints, which is a kind of amazing thing if you haven't really visited the country. But even if you visit the country, you really want to get more than just seeing and experience a little bit of the country. Working with artists, they'll tell you things, they'll show you things that you couldn't possibly obtain through books or even talking like this. I know I've only got 8 minutes, and I'm up to 6 now, but these are some of the photographs of images and places that I've been. This is the TNQ TAFE studio, which I rebuilt. They just had a little press and a demountable, and I built it up to that. So I've got my 13th studio now, and we're located right in the center of Cairns. I've moved around. The Editions Tremblay NFP, it doesn't stand for not-for-profit, it stands for No Fixed Press. People get the wrong idea. We work with artists. We work with them. We don't patronize them. We exploit each other. It's a two-way street. I make money from you. You make lots of money from me. You know what proportion that is? I get 1/10 of what they make. And that makes the wholesale price, and then the dealer makes 50% on top of that. But the good news is that I do whole editions. The publisher pays us all. But that's the reality of it. I don't do anything for free. I tell them that right at the beginning. They don't want to work for free. They're sick of people being patronized. And frankly, I don't want to be patronized either. Nobody does. So that guy there, the two ladies and that guy, I have to tell you this whole story about king plates. We bring king plates back to Australia. We raise money through the sale of prints. We do projects. We're working on a project called Unreal Shields. You'll see the book, and you'll see some of these images. And the idea is that we work in etching. We do give an artist a plate. They do an image on it. We print it. We sell it. We make some money. We raise money to buy the heritage materials back to Australia. I represent also an organisation called Ink Masters Cairns, and it's a club of 85 printmakers, and I've seen a few of them around here. We do interesting projects and stuff. So I'll leave it there. I could go on and on and on, but so I'll hand my box on to, what do I do?
Just keep going on the green.
Just keep going on the green, that's all change. Thank you.
Thanks, Theo.
Thanks, Theo.
And we're going to sort of
Really
open
great.
up a bit of discussion at the end, so that's why we're trying to make it as short as possible with each speaker. And our next speaker is Belinda Fox, who I'm sure most of you are aware, or perhaps know of Belinda's work. She's got a beautiful exhibition on at the fair at the moment, and a book launch tomorrow night.
Yeah, at 4 o'clock, if
Yep.
everyone's here.
And Belinda lived for quite some, she's an Australian artist, lived here until fairly recently and now resides in Singapore, and is a fantastic artist in her own right, but also has a great background in collaborating with artists to make prints. So we'd love to hear from you, Belinda.
Thank you. I'm just going to get through Theo's to get to my slides. You keep clicking till you get to. So I'm more coming from the artist's perspective in terms of collaboration with printmakers, but my very beginning is actually as a printer. So thanks, Trent. So I'm just gonna see if it's gonna work. Oh, here you go. So there's a pretty. So I first began as a printmaker at Port Jackson Press, and basically learnt on the job. But I learnt from starting printing with people like Charles Blackman and John Olsen, and so it was a baptism of fire, to be honest with you. And it was pretty amazing experience. And I learnt very quickly the role of collaboration and the beauty of it, and the importance of that relationship that is so special. But it started off as the printer. Now I'm on the other side of it, but through that experience, I think that I've got a great respect for what the printer does for the artist, and also how unique each printer is to those experiences. But it all began here with some great projects that I feel very privileged to have been able to do. That's John Olsen, and and there's Trent. This is us. So Trent came. So basically, Trent came from art school to Port Jackson Press, and he sort of trained through me. But really, we all were learning together, to be honest. But it was a great team. For me, collaboration on all levels of my art career has come through working with great people, and even collaborating as printers in a team is so important and so special. And so we had an awesome team. I'm not going to be shy to say, at that time during Port Jackson Press, with Sophia, Trent and I. So that was, and this is where things start to become a bit more about me as an artist. So on my weekends I would do my own work and print for other people through my day job. And slowly my art career started gaining traction and becoming a little bit more serious. And so Port Jackson Press were very supportive of me as an artist too, and published my work. These are some of the work that they did. Sorry the slides are so bad, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But I also, through that time while I was working with Port Jackson Press, they were also very generous in letting me learn and go off and do projects with other printers to gain expertise because I was young. I really didn't know what I was doing. But anyway, I was great at fudging it. And I would get to do things like I worked with Basil Hall, and that was through a grant to go work with him. And actually that's Bunduck up there who was there at the time, and Dorothy Napangardi, amazing people. And then I also went to America and did a workshop with Crown Point Press, which anyone can do. It's a summer school, but I had an amazing time, and I literally, it was my first inkling also as an artist to know that you can get a lot done in a week if you really put your mind to it. So I busted out some amazing etchings in that week and made great friends with everybody, and that actually led to a project that I pitched to Crown Point Press in San Francisco to work with Indigenous artist Dorothy, and I still can't believe it actually happened, but yeah, this happened, this is real. And we did it at the National Art School in Sydney. We made the plates with Dorothy, and then we went back to Crown Point Press and did the edition, and it's the only Australian artist they've ever worked with. And I was talking very recently to Kathleen Brown, who's the director, and I didn't realise I only do 3 projects a year. And that was one of them that year, and I was still like, whoa. I was so young, I just, you do stuff and then you don't realise. But anyway, then I decided to leave Port Jackson Press and pursue my art career full time, which was a really difficult decision because I love collaborating with artists and I love working in a team, and that was, it was pretty tough, but I also love making my artwork. So leaving there was a big decision, but it was a great decision to make. And my first project was with Trent here, and we did some stuff. It was pretty ad hoc kind of printmaking, wasn't it? But the prints I've got a picture of one of the prints, turned out really beautiful. Sorry, it's all pixelated. And then during that time, I also got a grant through Australia Council to go to the Singapore Tyler Print Institute and also to Tibet, and I worked on a project as a printer, and also I got to work as an artist on my own in their studios, which was an incredible experience. And that was their etching bath. For anyone who's a printmaker out there, it shows you the scale of what they do. It was insane, super fun. And these are some of the work I made there. And then I went to Cicada Press, and yeah, and that's what Michael does to all his artists when you're there. He just basically beats them up, and eventually a print comes out. It was super fun, being an artist and getting to work with people like Michael and Trent and Basil is a highlight of my career. And even though I'm in my studio a lot on my own, these projects become punctuations in my story that I treasure and is unique to printmaking, And this was me in Greece with Basil and a whole heap of incredible artists that I got to work with. So you also get to go travelling to gorgeous places, and and this is just the stuff that was happening in Greece, and it was super fun. And that's the print we made from that experience with Basil. This is me with Peter Lancaster. First time I've done lithography with Peter, so it was kind of pretty. It was, I was a bit really out of my depth, whereas I'm kind of no etching, but yeah, really happy with these prints. He's just an amazing guy. And then I went back to Cicada Press and did some more cool stuff with Michael. And then just recently, as Mel, she's in the audience too, I went to Chiang Mai. So moving to Singapore has made it really difficult to make prints, and I really missed that aspect of working. But I found an amazing guy called Kitakong who works in Chiang Mai and has this great press, and invited me to come over and make some prints. So I was there in March, and And it was so nice to be back in the studio, although he kept trying to take us out to lunch every 5 seconds, and he had no idea that it was just actually being in a printmaking studio was what I wanted to be doing. So we just had an amazing week, and both myself and artist Melinda Sharwell made some new prints, and you'll be able to see some of these prints at the stand if you mosey on over there afterwards. But for me, like, collaboration is kind of magic, and I love it, and I know I'll continue doing that forever. And that's what is great about printmaking. It gives you these opportunities. So that's all I have to say at this stage. Trento.
I think the notion about collaboration in the artist-printer collaboration, though, is like, we always say it's like a dance, a waltz. And the best printers know how to dance really well, and they have lots of dance partners. And so it's a really rare skill to have. And in Australia, there's another printer sitting in the front here. You should stand up, I'm sure everybody, it's hard to see. It's a really rare skill that it's not something that every personality or every person can sort of grow into. It's a skill beyond the technical skill of being the printer.
And also for artists, like not every artist is good at working with other people. They really can't do it. So it's a little bit of both. Somehow they come together.
Yeah. But I think the best printers can get the best out of the artists as well, and that's where the skill comes in. It's a sense of patience and, not...
A kick up the backside.
Yeah. So another great printer, Trent, who has set up his own fabulous press in Melbourne, Negative Press, and it's going to tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks, Anne. I'd like to say it's very nice to sit with these people on this very comfortable couch to talk to you today. Negative Press is a very small studio that's been operating since 2009, working collaboratively with artists, split between two distinct streams, I'd say. Some people come into the studio and pay me money to make their prints. And when I can afford it, I love to invite artists into the studio and pay for it myself. And then I guess with those projects, there's more freedom to fail and try different things. But one thing I'd say that is great about working in print and working with other artists is that the studio is generally speaking, is a very sacred place in a way. It seems a real privilege to go into someone like Rose Nolan's studio, or Brooke Andrews' studio, Belinda Fox's studio. The print studio is a more community-oriented space, so there's often other people that come into it, whether it's curators, other printers, administrators, people visiting the press. So to work with an artist in a print studio can be confronting for them, because everything that they would do quietly and that they might turn around to face the wall is on display to many people as they walk through the studio. I've always thought about printmaking, or even more so recently, as having two distinct strands. Print as a means of communication and distribution, which we see through Gutenberg's press and mass dissemination of printed matter. And printmaking really took off in that light. But what's happened since we have different ways of reproducing imagery is that printmaking has been able to emerge in its own right as a medium that can be taken seriously. Probably still, in my mind, not taken seriously enough, or not looked at. Obviously not by you guys. You guys are great. So I guess maybe I should stop talking about those things and talk about some of the projects at Negative Press. This is a recent project made with John Spitieri. John's a fabulous painter from Sydney who shows with Sarah Cottier Gallery here and with Neon Park in Melbourne. And we were very lucky that at the time we were trying to find a studio space. A friend said that we could work at Newington College in Stanmore, just down the road from here. So John and I kind of took over a classroom and had all these inquisitive students coming to talk to us during the course of making these prints, which was really a fantastic experience. And these prints, I can say, are at the Negative Press booth, which is P01 in Paper Contemporary, if you want to have a look. The
Not all artists would like to work in a school.
No, that's true, that's true.
That's pretty interesting.
But it's interesting because John is a teacher,
Oh, well, then.
so he's used to it. He knows how to do it. But it's very true. It's that I think what Anne was talking about was that negotiation between the artist and the printer in making work. How do you have the patience to allow the artist to work in a way they're comfortable, and how do you kind of help them get going because you only have a limited amount of time and usually a limited budget. My trick is to say to them, if there's anything you make that you don't like, we won't print it. And that makes people feel very comfortable. And always they can then just work freely, thinking that anything they do is not going to see the light of day, and most oftentimes it does. So it's very rare that doesn't work. So that's a good trick. This is Rose Nolan, so I'll just perhaps go through some images so we can move more into a conversation rather than me talking at you. This is Rose Nolan, the first published print made at Negative Press in 2012. You see what I'm saying, which was based on a residency she did in New York. She said if she'd made the work in Australia, it would have been, you know what I'm saying. It's just vernacular kind of language. This is a work by Christopher Day. I haven't actually collaborated with Christopher in making prints, but we're actually collaborating on making a book at the moment. And I think he's just a wonderful artist. He's a great friend to me. He comes and helps me in my studio when I really need some help, and I really appreciate that. I guess this was an example of that melding of the purposes of printmaking. This was a street poster made with Stuart Ringholt, and it was timed to coincide with his survey exhibition called Craft, which was at the Monash University Museum of Art and also at the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane. And these went up around the streets of Melbourne and Brisbane at that time. And we also, it seems strange to me now, we also made a small edition that was available for sale, and it's still confusing to me. I think it should have just always stayed a street poster. There's essays about all these works as well on the Negative Press website. Elizabeth Newman, Collateral Damage. These were made for an exhibition at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art called In the Cut, which was a collage exhibition. And we were just looking at ways that we could think about collage outside of physically sticking pieces of paper together. So we worked with like a digital process, pigment prints, so on a large inkjet printer, and then screen printing to be able to work on the same sheet of paper but give that sense of collaged process. And this is another work, Untitled, from that same series of works. I've been very lucky to work with Emily Floyd over the past, and the Australian Print Workshop. Actually, I'm going to go back. I saw some really fantastic works by Emily that the Australian Print Workshop had made in the MCA New Acquisition Show. It would have been 2008 that I saw those, and since then have made more wonderful works with Emily. Emily saw some of my own works in an exhibition and asked me to work with her on her exhibition, her survey exhibition at Heidi called Fire Rainbow. We made a series of prints called Ripple, 60 unique screen prints, and this is one of them. And you can see an installation view of some of the works around the walls of Heidi. And that morphed into working on her NGV survey exhibition called The Dawn, which was on until earlier this year, on 22 by 1.5 or 1.4 metre screen prints made up in 4 panels. And it's hard to see the joins, which I thought they were going to have these big, unseemly kind of joins in the works, but they're 4 pieces of paper put together and registered relatively carefully. But and that's an installation view of those works, they look really small. In my studio, they looked like they took up the whole floor space, but put them in the National Gallery and they looked, puny. But I spoke about this at the Print Symposium earlier in the year, but it led to these make-ready sheets, I guess you'd call them, where, because paper is quite expensive, it's $22 a sheet for this paper we're using, I ended up printing a lot of the forms from different screens, because there were 115 different screens or different exposures for this work on top of each other, and it formed the basis of a new work called Field Libraries. which I don't have any images here, but I have a few at the stand. But they ended up being a new work based on her work that was made for Venice Biennale that combined the history of all those different projects, which was actually something that I see in Belinda's work as well. So it's something that is perhaps quite universal across printmaking practice. And just quickly, some other works. I have 30 seconds. Brooke Andrew, who I also work with, actually I'll just leave it here at Brooke Andrew. I also work with Brooke as his assistant, and I've worked with him for nearly 10 years. And we just installed some big work at Barangaroo Cutaway Space last week, which will be open again this weekend. He's got a big wall drawing at the MCA at the moment called Loop, which is how I got to see the Emily Floyd works in 2008, installing that at MCA in 2008. But I'd say that the great thing, the parallel between working as an assistant to Brooke and working as a printer in a studio and in a collaborative sense, is that it requires the same kind of patience and kind of kick up the backside. And I mean, Brooke and I have a very good friendship, very close friendship, and we definitely bounce ideas off each other in the same way that we would, or I would, with other artists that I work with in the print studio. It's just that it's a much more sustained engagement because we are working together every week. And just as Belinda really, I guess, not moved beyond it, but moved in a different direction away from working as a printer, I mean, I feel my own practice is working more now towards, it's still very much focused on negative press and working with artists, but my own artwork is definitely kind of creeping in more. And more recently, Brooke and I have been collaborating on a series of artist books, and currently we're doing a concept proposal for the City of Melbourne for a public marker to Tunnerman and Morboyhina, with the first two people publicly hanged, or amongst the first group of people first publicly hanged in Melbourne. So it's interesting how those kind of the lines can really blur between collaborative practice and art making, and I think that the shift with Brooke has been kind of really interesting and very organic, and it hasn't been something that was thought about or planned. It's just occurred over time, and I think that someone who, other than the wonderful people here and Michael Kemp's in the audience and lots of wonderful printers here at the fair, I mean, John Lone is someone that I really respect and enjoy the work that he's made, and you definitely see that as well in the work that he does with Mike Parr. It's just, I mean, John made a joke that between he and Mike, they've got two good arms, because he has, a bit of problems with his arms from wiping so many plates of Mike's. But there is something beautiful about that kind of coming together and working together, and that idea of a collaborative practice that can be so natural. Okay. Thank you. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
So look, I think the other thing to really stress is that there's been an absolute resurgence in printmaking in Australia. And I'm sure that most of you are aware, in the last, I'd say 5 years, the groundswell has been incredible. Print workshops, artist collectives, little presses, people printing with artists have popped up all around the country, and not just in the capital cities. I know in Victoria, in all the regional centres in Victoria now, there's a really active print community happening, and it's really exciting. And even on a community level, we run lots of educational programs and classes, like I'm sure you do as well at Cicada. We're finding that people do a class, they go out by a press, they're making prints, they're running classes, and so this sort of web has just grown, and I think it's really incredible to see how that's happened, particularly in Australia in the last 5 years or so. But we are very fortunate to have a really strong community of really fabulous printers, collaborative printers in this country, who make some fabulous things. And I don't think sometimes that's as recognised as it should be publicly. And sometimes I think we as the print community have a lot to blame ourselves for. There's a lot of, I think, confusion in the community at what they're looking at sometimes. We bandy the word around print very loosely, and sometimes I think it's hard to define the difference between what might not be an original work, I'll use those terms, as opposed to something that has been beautifully crafted through a sense of collaboration with a great printer and artist, or an artist making it themselves. But look, given it's a relatively small group, are there any questions from the floor first? No? I might just throw a couple of questions to the printers. What are some of the toughest things for you, being on that, being the dance master, if you like?
Yeah, well, dancing is one analogy. I like to also think about filmmaking. Originally, filmmaking was done in a very humble way with an actor and a photographer, and they did everything, the sets, the costumes, everything. And, it grew, it expanded, and people got, bigger and better. Ken Tyler used to say, if you want to compete with other media, you got to go along with that and get bigger and so forth. So, you kind of invent things and develop things according to what the artist wants. But also, I want to say that printmaking is an extension of some of those basic elements of drawing, and it kind of extends your ability to express yourself in media beyond drawing. Digital art has, like a tsunami, taken the imagination of young people particularly, and you go to the art schools, and where is drawing taught? Well, it's still being taught, but not to the extent that it used to be. It's all this, and I don't think the digital age will end in a way that might be imagined. I mean, I think drawing is such a basic need for people from when they're this big. My kids have kind of given up drawing, and they'll come back to it because they're very good at it. But I like to think that it's a very human quality, and printmaking just extends those abilities if you like drawing.
As putting my printmaker hat on for a second, what was the hardest thing about being a printer and working with an artist was giving them the confidence to allow you into their space, because it's like you can't have one without the other, but as an artist, you don't usually have that problem. So some artists always work with different mediums and need to be facilitated with foundries, etc., if they're sculptors. But if you're a painter and someone invites you to come make a print with, like, Michael or whatever, they often have never had another person involved in that process. And so, for me, that was the challenge, is allowing, like Trent saying, allowing them to feel comfortable that they're making a mistake in front of often a stranger. And once you can get over that hurdle, them feeling comfortable to let you guide them, because you see 5 steps in front of them, even though you're not trying to dictate it. You can just it's just totally different experience, working back to front and on a different matrix, etc. So that's the biggest challenge. If you can get over that, then that's when exciting things happen. But it doesn't always happen. You can try your best, but it also gets down to personalities and natural stuff to be human. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Trent, about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. And I'd probably add to it now, it seems to be a lot about labour and time, because when Belinda and I were printing together in the early 2000s, we used to sometimes be doing, I know Michael Kempson still does this, and I'm incredibly impressed with his energy and ability. But we used to be printing something like 5-plate, multiple colour, maybe 6 or 7 colour etchings with plate tone here and there, and there might be 2 printers working on that, and maybe we'd make 9 of those in one day. And there was a commercial side of it as well, trying to keep us in work. I'm not sure if there's the same amount of time to work that way anymore, or to set type by hand. And this relates, I guess, to what Theo is saying as well. Within a print workshop environment, definitely within institutional educational spaces, within artist-owned studios, but to to kind of give the time that you require to that kind of practice takes a particular kind of dedication. So I think I'm saying my hat's off to people who are doing and working in those ways. And as I do some teaching at Monash University as well, I do try and encourage a lot of the design students, particularly who are coming completely from a digital perspective, to just see what working with type particularly, with monotype, can do for their creative practice and their creative careers. It's not necessarily to say, this is good and this is bad, but what can the cross-pollination of those processes offer?
There must be some questions out here. You see, there you go. Thanks for being in the middle. Yeah, it's being webcast. That's why we need to hear you.
So with each of your hats on, where do you see the future of printmaking, particularly with regards to the digital, telephone, instantaneous sort of stuff going on? How do we keep it alive? How do you inform people about it?
I'm quite curious about that too, because I live in Singapore now, so it's a completely different world in printmaking there than here. So I come here and home, and it's like exactly what you're saying, and it's so vibrant. And I can't find a print workshop to work in Singapore, not even one. So it's totally different. But what I'm curious about from you guys is this whole digital reproduction going on with the Age newspaper and big name artists and that are working in that, and they're not cheap. It's like that's $1,000 print still being made there that's being sold, and they're beautiful. Like, I'm not saying they're not beautiful things to put on your wall, but it's a poster. How is that affecting you guys? Like,
I think, and this is a bit of my bugbear at the moment, particularly over the last 12 months in Australia, there's always been, the confusion of what's a real print, that's not a real, But I think as the digital age, as we're all online, the online shopping, there's a lot of galleries now that only exist online. Some of them actually have real-time galleries as well, but and it's not digital prints as such, but these are just purely reproductions, posters. But what's happened is that there's been a cannibalisation of our language. So now they're described as limited edition fine art prints, printed on fine art etching paper, signed by the artist, overseen by the artist and signed in pencil by the artist, with an embossed chop mark on the, for most print houses we all have a chop mark, with a chop mark. Sometimes if you read the fine line down the bottom they'll say the word reproduction, but it's very hidden on about page 3.
Facsimile prints. That's that.
No, they don't even say that now. The language has become so, and there's a few sites, I've been trawling them a lot lately, and I think that is an issue. Not so much for us, and we have our own, followers and collectors, but I feel really cross for the buying public, who I think get very confused. And so the language has changed. There's always been those places that sold, the limited edition. It's a bit like, the photographs at cricket time. You'd see the ads come up on the cricket. Limited edition, and there'd be the cricket team, and they'd all sign the photograph, and there's a limited edition of, anything can be a limited edition, let's face it, of 5,000 things in a frame. But it's the language that's changed. And I find it's quite deceptive and very close.
Well, the connoisseur who really follows art, I don't think it's a real issue. I mean, the cheap reproduction, I mean, we get that in Cairns a lot. People
they're
have
not
a
cheap,
budget.
But they're not cheap.
They're not cheap.
They're like,
And they're leading artists is the problem.
Well, people work to a budget too, and we get the travellers who want have a budget of $20 or $50, and there is that problem. But I want to say also that as an extension of architecture, printmaking fits into a kind of a fashion category as much as anything. I mean, people do collect work and they treasure it or they don't. but I think they soon realize that they've bought a dud, or people who are really keen to follow an artist or to follow a movement will do their research. People will pay $300 for something that is worthless in 3 years, but they understand that eventually. So I'm thinking that printmaking is going to follow a kind of an architectural model where people have to fill spaces. The problem with society these days, everybody moves around a lot. And in this country, I think the average is every 5 years. In the States, I go back there and people have bigger houses and they have bigger spaces to fill. And I just wonder about that part of our lives as well. Keeping things, is it as meaningful as having a monitor and changing the background every 3 days, sort of thing? So it's a changing society and so forth. In my case, I work with artists who want to get the stories, and there's different ways of doing that. I feel like a kind of a midwife in that way to try to get the stories and try to produce them in the best way I can. So it's different, I know. But I think it's always going to be limited. We're always going to be working with a very small, imaginative, but very intelligent population, and that's where we're directing. They'll come to us, but the person in the street selling to frame shops, the people have bought the frames before they've even put something in it half the time.
I'm a little bit more cynical than that, Theo. And I agree. But I think it has become far more sophisticated. The marketing tools that we have now, or not, some of us, are far more sophisticated. And I think for the print community, our community, it's something that we do need to look at pretty thoroughly, and it's the language. I just say it's the cannibalisation of that language. If you go onto some of the sites, and I won't mention them here, it's my pet thing at the moment. Just look at how they're described, and they're not cheap. They're not $300. We're talking $1,100, printed in editions of 30, by reputable artists, and they're just photographic reproductions of an existing painting. They're all printed in the same format, in a nice frame. You can go on the site and you can actually pretend you're in the gallery and hang it in your bedroom and see how big it is in comparison to the size of a person standing in front of it. And to all intents purposes, we know what it is, but if you're just reading it for the first time, you go, oh, terrific, what a fantastic, I love that artist's work, that's great. Oh, $1,100, boom. And it's not till you read way, way down. So it's just the way they're described now.
Are these works authorized by the artist?
Yeah, it's totally
it says
legitimate.
Supervised by the artist, signed in pencil, chop mark. It's the language.
But Trent will have something interesting to say with that, because your work is relating to, you are combining digital and screen printing and the poster work you're doing. I mean, you're kind of playing with the conceptual. No, but that's that's that market is kind of competing with you in a sense, but not. But you're also conceptually invested in what this means, these kind of what original and mass-produced, etc. So,
well, I think I just want to say one thing to answer Mel's question before talking to that. I feel incredibly optimistic about the future of printmaking. Especially working with a lot of young people within Victorian College of the Arts Secondary School and seeing kids at Newington College here in Stanmore, working with students at Victorian College of the Arts and Monash University. I think with the increasing uptake of digital technologies, younger people are much more interested to explore what they can do with their hands and to have a break from Facebook and Instagram and Excel and PowerPoint and all the actually much better programs that I can't name. And talking about this kind of increasing market of reproduction works, I think what those companies have done that is really great is that they communicate everything very well. They're incredible at marketing. So I think probably us on the couch that are printers and publishers could learn from them too. I don't like what they're doing, but they can do it. And I do feel bad for people that are buying it, but I guess people do kind of purchase artwork or think about art in many different ways. So they have a market. I'd never buy it. I'd never encourage anyone I know to buy it. I don't think about a lot of the work I make in terms of investment or those kind of terms, but I'd say that those kind of reproductions are a very poor investment.
But they're not titled that anymore, and I think that's the
No.
difference. They've always been there, and it's fine, and people, as you say, have the right to choose.
Yes.
But it's just the language that's changed,
And
and
I
I
think
think
that-
for me that's a significant shift.
And I would wholeheartedly agree with you, Anne, that language has been cannibalised. But I am incredibly impressed by how well they do, kind of Instagram, Facebook, websites, everything else.
They have the resources to have those huge
Yeah, we should
online engines.
We should join together and hire their marketing people. And but it's very interesting. I feel like I've noticed it very much in the past 12 months as well.
Recently.
I don't
And-
think that's the future of printmaking.
No,
is
No,
I don't think it's
no,
the
no.
future of
I'm just
printmaking.
curious on that,
Yeah.
because whether that's affecting printmaking. But for me, printmaking has always been such a redundant technology. Like we're dealing with ancient technology
We call it the
anyway.
dinosaur technologies.
Yeah. So it's going to continue and be what it is because it's always somehow managed to survive to now, and it's still flourishing and goes in and out of particularly universities, whether they sell off their presses and then they buy them all back again, and, it's like the wheel turns. But I kind of think it's just going to continue. I think the hybrid of digital and traditional techniques are an interesting possibility in the future, especially with the papers that can do both now. That's kind of, I think, interesting perhaps.
I was talking to Glenn Barclay, and he might have been joking, but he said to me, printmaking is the new ceramics. So I think...
That's what we said.
Yeah.
Everyone used to have a pottery... Sorry, I grew up in the 70s. Everyone used to have a pottery wheel and a kiln, literally. And now everyone has an etching press. It is. Printmaking is the new ceramics.
Rock and roll.
Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. But it's like everyone now, because of our education programs, it's a leisure market. I mean, yes, we get artists as well, but a lot of people come and do a class, hobby. But what's different now for someone who did go to art school in the late 70s, nobody could have ever dreamt of owning an etching press back then. Absolutely. It was just out of the question. And now people do a $300 weekend class, and they've gone to Melbourne Etching Supplies and ordered the biggest etching press they can build
Awesome.
to put in a studio at home. So everybody, literally printmaking on all levels has just exploded across this nation in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Which is a good thing.
There's a question up the top there.
Sorry.
Just having a camera phone at all is making everybody think more visually than they used to and think of themselves as creators in a way, and then eventually they want to do something with their hands as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got an answer to that. I think the more we get into technology, the more we create a folk art out of our digital technology, because it's immediate. It's the kind of new sewing, I think, digital art. And as that grows, people are going to wonder about these older processes and look at them more carefully and appreciate them more. I hate to say it, but as things kind of die out, the more attention they get because they're going, they're leaving, and people want to know more about it. So I think there's a kind of a balance there.
One of the biggest demographics that attended our education programs were graphic designers who had been trained on the computer and worked on the computer and then wanted to enrol in something to get their hands.
I think Instagram and things like that are becoming an incredible marketing tool and an amazing platform to engage because it's a visual format to begin with. Nothing is changed in that respect, that it lends itself for artists to use it marketing-wise, and I think that's interesting. And I don't know if people want to become artists because they use Instagram, but yeah.
I definitely think that there's this very much a sense of the idea of the maker within kind of Instagram, Facebook, other social media platforms. And generally, I think many people are by their nature creative. But I think that also there used to be, I guess, critics that people would read. And I'm not saying that we need lots more critics, but there used to be a way of, I guess, maybe it was bad, I don't know, I'm just going to say it, but there were ways of kind of having silos of where people are working, and I'm not kind of saying that we should have this elitist system where, you know, fine art is at the top, but maybe it should be, I don't know. But maybe the thing that has happened, and what I'm trying to say with Instagram, Facebook and other things, is that there's just so much information out there, and there's not really any way of sorting it out and filtering and saying, well, what is really great work? How do you separate the reproduction from the fine art print? How can you educate people? Do people want to be educated, or is it just about, that's cool, like, move on to the next thing? How do you kind of have an engagement with an audience beyond the digital realm? I took part in a graphic arts festival in Melbourne a few years ago, and I had a stand next door to someone who was a really wonderful person. I wasn't a great fan of the work, but she told me that she sold most of it through Instagram, and I mean, that was very new to me at the time. But something that's never happened to me, but she had issues with people kind of copying her work and then producing it overseas and selling. And she's, you know, she had to kind of take legal action against people in Indonesia and elsewhere to stop her work being kind of copied. I don't think that's ever going to happen at Negative Press, but it's just an interesting follow-on from that kind of explosion of images and issues of copyright and dissemination. Yes?
I think there's always been like this marriage between image and craftsmanship, and then you throw in the marketing. Now, what happened with the master printers in America, they were brought over from Europe by the Tamron Lithography Workshop. And what happened there, it came at the right time when actually pop art was coming in. Yeah. And the commercial aspect was this. You had somebody like Robert Rauschenberg have a show, sell all his paintings at $800 each, and then 5 years later, they're worth $80,000 each. And so with the master printers coming over from Europe, they started, Tamron Lithography Workshop started getting in the big names. And so all of a sudden you had shows where if you couldn't afford the Rauschenberg painting, you could buy the print for $300. And the market just took off. And it helped the people that were lower down on the pyramid too. There was a market for ordinary artists who weren't the big names and stuff. So you have this thing where now it's becoming more separated. The difference between image making and the craftsmanship. One of the schools I attended 50 years ago, of course, so you have to take that into account. I've seen it progress since then, where the department, the printmaking department, has expanded. And it's expanded to where they now call it, you know, something like communications, media, and printmaking instead of just printmaking. And what they have is 5 rooms of like computers and all the other stuff you use for digital stuff. And then they have what they call the dirty room or the messy room. So when you're talking about the people that are dissatisfied with maybe, quote, their digital sort of age, I think you're talking about something that's always been there. It's like when people work for IBM. They felt that they were a tiny cog in a machine. And they would go home, and they had a workshop, and they would build a chair. And considering the time, their time in terms of what they would get paid and everything, they're looking at it, and it's like a $1,500 chair that they've constructed. But they're very proud of it because they've done something from the beginning to the end, and they can use it. And I think we're also running into this with the printmaking. Now, I'm looking up there, and I see, like one of the things said, pigment with screen printing. Was the pigment digital? Is
That's
it
right.
cross
correct.
media like
Yeah.
that? This is where the confusion starts to come in. And I think that, it's not just the media out there and the marketing, but it's also the schools that are now a part of this game, and people are attracted because with the digital, it's so much easier in terms to just produce it. Push a button, and the thing prints out. Any comments?
Yeah, I guess my only comment perhaps would be just around uses of digital media. I mean, I think with this image, that was the hardest part. Maybe that's because I'm a Luddite. But I'd say with this artist, Christopher Day, he's a photographer, photo-based artist. He shoots analog onto film. He has this incredible method where he kind of maintains like one kind of he maintains a black point and a really white point and just kind of shifts the mids within the camera. He processes the film, scans the negatives, and then starts working on it digitally. And the output, the end product is this digital print, and they call them pigment prints. But I'd say that Christopher, he prefers to be called Christopher spends as much time making this work as I might spend making, he might spend more time actually than I might spend making a screen print or an etching. So it's all, I guess there's so much movement within those ideas and ways of working. So I think it's so hard to kind of categorize between medium media because people work with them in such different ways.
I think that's a separate issue, though. I think that's an artwork, that's an original work, because that's how it exists. I think what I was talking about, following on from what Belinda alluded to, was these are an existing painting that someone's just snapped, pushed the button on the computer and printed. So that's what I'm talking about, and that's
and
cannibalised
the language
the
of
language.
how you're selling that.
Yeah.
Instead of just pushing a button.
Yeah, so there's absolutely
on the
nothing
camera.
wrong with digital printmaking or digital prints, but I was talking more about the thing that's actually a photographic reproduction. It's a poster, but it's using the same language as we're talking about here. And I think that's become far more sophisticated in the last wee while. And I think it is something that we do need to address as a community or be aware of.
Well, I'm thinking, in my press, just purely from the description of the work, we issue authenticities for everything we sell, and it's very clear and precise what we're actually selling. Truth is difficult sometimes, but we try to analyze, accurately what we're presenting, right down to the inks and paper, right down to the process. I mean, it's not just a lino cut; it's a relief printed vinyl or linoleum. We're now calling vinyl prints or vinyl cuts instead of lino cuts. We work from vinyl because it's a more substantial material. Linoleum is very inferior. I don't know if you know this. I mean, any of you played around with linoleum? It's entirely organic. It's old world. Do you know that linoleum was originally made from fabric and linseed oil? That's what its binder is, linseed oil. Linoleum is made from...
I think we're going to have to wind it up a bit.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
getting the...
Okay, well, there you go. But there are also different sorts of matrix, so you have to describe the matrix. You have to describe everything about it. I guess what I feel difficult about working with a lot of the digital technologies is that it's machines, I mean, that are replacing people. And it's kind of like a parallel to what's happening in our society. You know, people have been put out of work. We've got to appreciate the lineage of human intervention, like cooks and like carpentry and all of those things. And as they pass on from one generation to the other, there will always be those people who appreciate those hand manipulated skills.
And that's
and
probably
those
a
who
really
don't.
good segue to say thank you to these three great artists and printers.
Thank you.
And I'm sure they'll be around if anyone wants to catch up with someone and ask them a question. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And go and see all the fabulous print stands in the paper contemporary area if you haven't already been there.